So, in the universe of investing, many people tend to stick to geographies or maybe certain sectors, but recently there's been a rise of interest in this thing called thematic investing. And a large part of that is really thanks to ARK Invest as well as Kathy Wood. And I made a longer video about them, so you can check it out if you were interested. So in this video, I wanted to explore deeper into this subject of thematic investing. But more importantly, what are some of the major considerations and risks that we need to think about should we want to invest thematically? Hey guys, it's Sun Min and welcome back to Your Money Game, the show where we'll get better with saving, spending and investing. Similar to ESG investing, there isn't a hard definition of what thematic investing really is. Wow. It's broadly an approach that tries to capture growth around very macro trends that are usually brought on by some kind of technological change, societal change or environmental change. Because of the breadth of the theme, it tends to cut across multiple sectors or industries, which is why in a portfolio of thematic investing, you tend to see companies that might not usually get lumped together. An example from ARK is its ETF called ARKQ, which tracks the autonomous tech and robotics theme. That ETF includes Tesla, which you might have heard of, but it also includes a Chinese company called JD.com, which is China's second largest e-commerce player. Now, you might not normally find those two companies lumped together, but because JD has invested in its own autonomous tech, the smart guys at ARK Invest felt that, hey, both these two companies, they belong in that same macro theme of autonomous tech and robotics. Now you could say that ARK has become a flag bearer of this entire approach because all of their funds have done amazingly well in 2020. For example, ARKG, which tracks the genomics theme, in 2020 it was up about 185%, and as of this filming in 2021, year to date is already up 15%. And while ARK has done a fantastic job in communicating its approach and talking publicly about its beliefs, they're not the only ones providing thematic funds. Major players such as BlackRock and Invesco also have their own options, but you even have more niche players such as Global X, which has 25 options for you to choose from in terms of themes. So the more popular the approach has become, the more options there are for investors like us to choose from. So right now there's so many themes out there and all of them kind of have a pretty compelling case. Digital security. Nowadays, with the rise of so many businesses digitizing, and on top of that, hackers are becoming more aggressive. Therefore, this must be a big theme, right? Genomics. Nowadays, with DNA sequencing costs dropping so much, and on top of that, the future is personalized medicine, right? So therefore, it should be a major theme, right? Clean energy. You get the point. So there are a ton of exciting things happening in the world right now to invest in. So let's quickly dive into how to invest. Now, in theory, you could pick individual stocks, but unless you're really experienced or you have a lot of money to build a diversified enough portfolio, that approach might not be very practical. My preference here is to really use a fund, but there are some key considerations here as well. Do you want a fund that's actively managed, such as ARK Invest? Or do you want a fund that's a bit more passive that follows an index instead? Most of ARK's funds are actively managed, so therefore you're paying for their skill in actively picking which are the right stocks to build in their portfolio. An example of an indexed approach is an ETF called BOTZ, which is a robotics ETF offered by Global X. That specific ETF tracks an index that's provided by this company called INDXX. And it specifically tracks its global robotics and AI theme. So in other words, you are trusting that index provider in doing a good job in selecting the right stocks to build that index. And why that matters is your next consideration, which is really how concentrated of a portfolio do you want. Like I mentioned, ARK's funds are actively managed, and most of its portfolios contain between 30 to 50 stocks. And that approach tends to magnify rewards but also increases the risk should one of those stocks fall. Some, but not all indexes, have a broader set of holdings which might be more comforting for those of you who prefer a lot more diversification, such as me. Say you were exploring the theme of disruptive innovation and you saw ARK's fund, which is ARKK, and that's really exciting, but they hold again about 30 to 50 stocks. So if you wanted more diversification, and then you were looking around, and then you could find another ETF called DTEC, Now, while the theme is similar, DTech actually tracks another disruptive tech index provided by Index, INDXX. It tracks the same theme, but it holds 100 stocks instead. And on top of that, if you dig deeper, you realize that the components are actually very different than ARK's components. And that's just in the US stock market. If you happen to have access to the German stock market and you pulled up the ETF DTech, DTEC, what you'll find is another disruptive tech ETF provided by a complete different provider. And that disruptive tech fund actually tracks a different index provided by MSCI. And that specific index is even more diversified with 602 holdings. So sorry for getting into the weeds there, but my point is this. If you were interested in the theme, just make sure to check for all the alternatives there are out there because you might find something that fits your investing style a little bit better. And while you're at it, check down below for the like button, and if it's still grey, maybe turn it blue for me, will you? Thanks. So yes, the future is exciting, and yes, there are many people that will underestimate the power of some of these themes to change the way we live. But at the risk of being a downer, I always believe in trying to present a balanced view. So here are some of the major risks and considerations we need to think about. The biggest risk is that picking the right theme and hoping that it will outperform, it's actually really difficult, especially in the long run. Now, it's nicely summed up in a quote taken from an article by CFA Institute, and it basically says that it is performance chasing with a narrative. Now, it's not just a snarky quote. Now, the researchers there did a very interesting experiment. They took some historical market data, and what they tried to do is recreate thematic investing historically and backtest it. They simulated two portfolios. The first was the industry that performed the best in 3 years. The second was to choose the top 3 industries that performed in the past 3 years, and then they simulated it over the long term. Long story short, both those funds underperformed the broad market in the long run. Part of the logic is simple. Usually, when performance of an industry becomes so great, it attracts a lot of attention and therefore a lot of money as well. And people tend to buy all these things and therefore raise the prices to become so high. At some point, prices become so expensive, and on top of that, expectations become so high that these companies find it difficult to meet those expectations. As a result, these companies get punished in the stock market, therefore driving their prices lower in the future. And that brings us to the next risk, which is how prepared are you to ride out periods of underperformance? Lately, the cybersecurity theme has been really hot, and on top of that, if you look at this ETF called ARK, it has done really well. But there was a period where if you happen to invest in 2015's high, there was a lot of underperformance and you would have to wait for about 2.5 years before prices rallied above 2015. A more extreme example was the boom in biotech, and I remember growing up, there was such an exciting theme around. And if you happen to be an investor back then in 2001 and you chose an ETF called IBB, you would have to have waited 10 years to recover to that high. So even if you have high conviction, you really have to develop a lot of patience if things don't go right. On top of that, maybe have an exit plan as to when you would really want to get out of it. The next thing to remember is to always be wary of any form of hype. The more something is sold to you, the more you really want to be a little bit more cautious. A couple of weeks ago, I did a video about market manipulation, where hedge funds sometimes talk up a good game to pump up the prices of what they are investing in. Now, I'm not saying that these providers of thematic funds are doing the same thing, but you have to admit that when they're out there talking about the theme being really big, they only stand to gain. After all, the more money that flows into their funds, the more money they make in managing it. Finally, for those of us who are still interested in thematic investing, a more useful question is just how invested do you really want to be? If your conviction is lower, remember that if you are investing in a broad index-based fund such as the VTI or maybe SPY, you are technically already investing in some of these themes. It's just that, yeah, the allocation is small. If you were moderately bullish on a theme, you can therefore then take out a small portion of that portfolio and then allocate it towards that theme. So in some ways, that's kind of my approach, where about 10% of my portfolio is allocated towards ARKK, And even there, it's not a specific theme, but disruptive innovation touches quite a few different themes as well. For those with high conviction, it's simply a matter of picking that specific themed fund and of course, upping your allocation as well. But just remember, the more focused you are and the more money you put behind it, the more risk that you are going to be incurring. So it's your money game and it's your choice of just how aggressive do you want to be. So I guess you could say that I'm relatively conservative. So what about you though? What kind of themes are you interested in and how much are you thinking of allocating towards it? So with that said, thanks for watching guys, and I really hope that you got some value out of this. And if you did, as always, I'd really appreciate your support in clicking that like, subscribe, as well as that bell button, because I'll be back again next Sunday with a brand new video. And until then, you take care and keep playing your own game.